We start this hour with what President Biden is calling Jim Crow in the 21st century. Georgia passing new voting restrictions, even banning bringing snacks to people waiting at the polls. Here's Biden weighing in on the move this afternoon.
An atrocity. The idea, if you want any indication that it has nothing to do with fairness, nothing to do with decency, they pass a law saying you can't provide water for people standing in line while they're waiting to vote. You don't need anything else to know that this is nothing but punitive, designed to keep people from voting. You can't provide water for people about to vote. Give me a break.
Also, the crisis at the border. House Democrats and Senate Republicans both visiting Texas today, but offering very different perspectives on the migrant situation there.
I think oftentimes we forget to consider here in our comforts in the United States that many across the world are living with, even our closest neighbors.
All of us today witnessed the Biden cages. What is occurring here on the border is heartbreaking, and it is a tragedy.
And later this hour, an NBC News exclusive, sweeping changes could be coming to the Department of Homeland Security to combat the growing threat of domestic violent extremism in America. Start in Georgia, where Republican Governor Brian Kemp signed massive voting rights restrictions into law. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman is in Atlanta, and Latosha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter, is also with me now. Her organization is part of a lawsuit against this new legislation. Josh, we're going to start with you. We can see and hear the protesters where you are. Tell us what's going on and walk us through some of the major changes in this bill.
This protest has been going on.
Yeah, well, you can see from the scene behind me, just in front of the state capitol here in Georgia, that people are very upset about what the governor signed into law last night. You have people here protesting with signs that say Black Votes Matter, Stop Jim Crow. A lot of them coming here to support Park Cannon, that state lawmaker who was actually arrested, charged with 2 felonies last night after she tried to enter the room where Governor Kemp was signing the bill. Some of the measures that they are particularly concerned about involve the shortening of the calendar for the elections that they have here in Georgia, and making it so that there's less time when people can actually vote early. That was obviously so critical in the elections that we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the fact that folks are going to have to use a driver's license or state ID number to prove their identity if they want to cast absentee ballots. And this is really going to affect a wide cross-section of Georgians, but particularly workers, people who have less income, as well as minorities. And I spoke with Mark Wilkerson, who's the political director of the Service Employees International Union here in Georgia. They represent a lot of the thousands of workers at the major Atlanta airport and elsewhere. Take a listen to what he had to say about why Republicans are doing this now.
It almost gotten to the point where it's just outright cheating. And, you know, you hear all the lies that they talked about last November, but now it's just out in the open. We see what they're trying to do. They're hurt because they lost the election. Now they're trying to switch the game on us.
See, a lot of the times,
Now, Republicans maintain this is actually about expanding access to voting. They're pointing to things like some increased locations to vote. We also heard from the chairwoman of the Republican Party today. She is defending this law and says that it's about trying to restore people's faith in the integrity of the election after all of the concerns after the last election, many of those of which were stoked by false statements from former President Trump.
we want to talk about testing.
Latosha, I want to play what Georgia's Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock said about this bill earlier and ask you a question on the other side.
They're trying to make it harder for people to vote rather than making it easier for people to vote. We saw how important vote by mail is. When you think about working families, they need opportunities to be able to exercise their franchise. And it became particularly important in the middle of this pandemic, which we're not out of yet. And besides, the people of Georgia have been voting like this for years. Now, all of a sudden, it's a problem.
Latosha, what does this bill mean for Black voters?
You know, it's ironic, even in the statement, as Senator Warnock talked about absentee ballot voting. That was actually a measure that was introduced and led by the Republicans. They had a couple of years ago where they wanted to make sure that rural voters had access to the ballot. And so it's really interesting that now they have a change of heart because there have been other people who've used it, other constituency groups that have used that tool. You know, what I see is this is quite frankly what it is on its face, as we're seeing. This is racist and it's anti-democratic. What we know of this last election cycle is we had a historic turnout of voters all across the state of Georgia. 46% of the population in Georgia are non-white people. That Black voters turned out in record numbers, even with the runoff election that was specifically designed to be a deterrent for Black voters. We overperformed. And so what we're seeing now is that Black voters are essentially being punished for participating and exercising our civil right. But, you know, we've filed a lawsuit. We're going to take this to the streets. We're taking this to the courtrooms, and we're also going to take this to the halls of the Capitol. It is not over.
So let's talk about that lawsuit. Latosha, you tweeted yesterday, we are lawyered up. Let's go. Ain't no more playing, GA. Tell us about the lawsuit your organization is a part of and what you're hoping to achieve here.
So Mark Elias is our lead attorney. We're really excited about this lawsuit going forward with the New Georgia Project and Rise Up Incorporated, which is a student-led organization. That part of what we're saying is that the elements of this is unconstitutional, that what they're trying to do, I mean, if you just think about the most egregious part of the bill that we don't talk about, you don't hear a lot discussed, is really around the takeover of the Board of Elections in these county offices. And so if the GOP does not like it, the state can essentially say, oh, we don't like that, we're going to take over. That is at its core anti-democratic. To criminalize organizations that are passing out food and water, you know, if there was really an effort and an interest in really about the integrity of this election, we would make sure that the state and the governor would have made sure that people are not waiting in line 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. And so we're seeking injunctive relief from the federal court system around this bill that fundamentally we think at its core, it is against the Voting Rights Act as it currently stands, and it undermines our democratic practices and our democratic ability to be able to freely and fairly cast our vote.
I mean, Latosha, you said it. Forget about the snacks. Let's talk about those lines, right? Josh, let me ask you a separate question. You pushed Senator Warnock on the filibuster today. I'd like to play that.
I'm a member of the Senate. I respect its traditions. I'm honored to be there to represent the people of Georgia. But the issue of voting rights is about the democracy itself. It's much bigger than any Senate rule.
Josh, House Democrats passed a bill to protect voting rights earlier this month. What's its status in the Senate?
Yeah, well, that bill, H.R. 1, kind of the opposite of what they passed here in Georgia. That bill, a sweeping rewrite of election laws that would have done things like create automatic voter registration, also require states to allow people to register the same day of the election. Now that, as you point out, passed the House. And in the Senate, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has pledged that that will come to the floor. But in a really rare event earlier this week, we saw both Chuck Schumer and the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, take to the floor to speak out against each other. Chuck Schumer shouting, shame, 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 while Mitch McConnell argued that this would be a federal takeover of elections that are supposed to be run by the states. McConnell also arguing that it would take the Federal Election Commission and make it overly partisan. But as you point out from those comments from Senator Warnock, this is just the latest example that Democrats are seizing on to make the argument that they cannot allow the filibuster to stand in the way of critical civil rights legislation.
Josh, Latosha, thank you both so much. Have a great weekend. Senate Republicans and House Democrats visiting the same border today, but with very different messages.
Here's the bottom line. The Border Patrol and Health and Human Services and the non-governmental organizations that are struggling to deal with this flood of humanity tell us they cannot get ahead of this flood of humanity without policy changes in Washington, D.C.
We're glad to see that the Biden administration, is building up the capacity to handle the kids who have presented themselves for asylum.
NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff joining me now. Jacob, you have been to the Rio Grande, where Senate Republicans are today. What stands out about what you saw and heard from their visit today?
Allison, that the Republican senators toured, launching from Onslow Lewis Park in Mission, Texas, the Rio Grande in a gunboat with machine guns, occupied or guided, I should say, by the Texas Department. You're looking at it right there for public safety. I've been on that dock. Yep. I've stood next to those boats. I've looked at them closely. Those boats are meant for interdicting drug smuggling and dangerous people, cartel members perhaps, that might be on the other side of the river, not asylum-seeking children. And the idea that they would go in a show of force almost up to take a look at what really is a humanitarian crisis inside Border Patrol facilities specifically, because they don't have enough space to take the children and put them with child welfare professionals and health and human services, and do it kind of looking like this. It is baffling, honestly, and it's not where they're going to find their solution. You're not going to scare people away from coming to this country. You've heard me say that before. It didn't work under Obama. It didn't work under Trump, certainly, who tried the harshest tactics of any president with family separations. And it's not going to work during the Biden administration, even if you have 19 Republican senators on a gunboat.
Yeah, Jacob, you bring up some really important points about the optics there, as we were showing the Army fatigues, the rifles there, certainly sends a certain type of message. Let me ask you about something we're learning about today. A 9-year-old child from Mexico died trying to cross the Rio Grande. A mother and her 3-year-old rescued. Just horrible to hear. I mean, we're talking about mothers, children, families. What else do you know about what happened there?
Well, what I can tell you is, sadly, it is not surprising that migrants attempting to enter the United States die along their journey, whether it's in the Rio Grande or in the desert of Arizona or in the brush of Falfurrias, Texas, north of where those senators are today. It's built into American immigration policy. It's called prevention through deterrence. The idea that you can force migrants to cross in what has specifically been referred to as hostile terrain in U.S. government Border Patrol documents in 1994. And this is the way, unfortunately, the immigration enforcement system along the border is set up to work, to funnel people coming here into places where it's dangerous or deadly to cross so that they would think twice about doing so. But it doesn't stop people. Just as I just said, whether it's tough talk from politicians or a border wall or a river, it's not going to stop people who are coming here because of desperate circumstances. And this, latest horrific tragedy of a child losing their life is sadly another example, and there's a human story behind it.
Jacob, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki saying the administration is working on opening new facilities to house migrant children. Here she is at the Daily Briefing.
One of our biggest issues, as we've talked about before, is moving these kids out of the Border Patrol facilities into the shelters. And we need to have places that are safe, that have educational resources, health resources, mental health resources, legal resources. This is a step toward doing that.
Jacob, that's just one part of this, but how else can we get these kids out of CBP custody as fast as possible? What else needs to happen here?
I think Jen Psaki is right there to get children into, as mandated under the law, the care and custody of Health and Human Services within 72 hours once they arrive in this country. There are very valid questions raised about whether or not these temporary influx shelters, like the ones you're looking at in the pictures there, when Gabe Gutierrez toured Carrizo Springs earlier this week, because they're big, they're impersonal. The level of staffing and the oversight is different from the more permanent shelters, but they just simply don't have the space at this time because of the number of kids, the unprecedented number of kids, let's be honest here, coming into the country at the beginning of the Biden administration. And so what Jen Psaki said is right. It's a matter now of logistically being able to stand up those types of facilities and make sure, advocates will tell you that they have the protections for the children in place so that, you don't see things happening to them that shouldn't be in the care and custody of the United States government.
Yeah. Overwhelming numbers and some tough logistics to work out there for sure. Jacob Soboroff, we always love having you on. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
President Biden condemning Georgia's new voting law this afternoon, calling on Congress to step up and take some action. NBCNews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece joining me now. Shannon, shortly before the Biden made those comments today, the White House released a statement calling this move Jim Crow in the 21st century, adding it must end. What does the president want Congress to do here, and what action can he actually take on this?
Well, yeah, I think, the second part of your question is really interesting, Allison. What can he do? Because we have talked a lot about the situation in Congress, whether it is guns, immigration, voting rights, the situation you have in the Senate where, they don't necessarily even have 50 Democratic votes, and they have this issue of the filibuster they have to overcome. But one of my colleagues asked President Biden before he left for the weekend at his Wilmington, Delaware home, what he could actually do. And, he said, well, I don't know, but he said the Department of Justice was looking at it, specifically this Georgia law. So I think that's a little bit of a new twist and dynamic here, that maybe there is something they can do on the executive branch level, on the DOJ level, not necessarily to change voting laws, but to push back on some of these efforts on the state by state level. But of course, what we also saw the president do is really ratchet up his rhetoric on this issue, using very strong language about this Georgia bill that was signed into law recently, and putting pressure on Congress to do something. And, that's the type of thing that can help coalesce the party and put pressure on a few of those outliers of the Democratic Party that aren't necessarily on board here.
Shannon, the White House is getting ready for a virtual climate summit next month. I understand the president's inviting dozens of world leaders. Do we know who's on this guest list? And what other information do you have about this two-day event? I know it's still in the planning stages.
Right, and it would be the first international summit that the White House would have. Not the first, but it would be the next big one they have. So it's the next big one on the agenda. President Biden said he has spoken to all of the EU leaders. He spoke to the UK's Boris Johnson about this. And one of the reporters asked him before he was leaving the White House if he has talked to President Xi and President Putin about this. And he said he has not spoken to them directly, but he said that they are invited, that they know they are invited. So the potential that one of them could join in on this as well. But of course, in the big picture, laying the groundwork again that the U.S. is going to take a leadership role on the issue of climate.
Shannon, Vice President Harris sitting down for a one-on-one with former President Clinton about empowering women and girls at her alma mater, Howard University. What advice did she have?
Well, she had some advice that we could all probably use these days when we're so distracted and dealing with so much, and that is essentially to be present. Here's what she had to say at that event.
I think the advice I would give is be present. Don't just push through. See what is around you, in particular to the students. Just be hungry for all that you have access to in terms of what you can learn, what you can observe, what you can read, what you can say and speak. Be present.
Maybe even advice, Allison, a vice president could take. I think we could all use that type of advice.
Yeah, fantastic advice for all of us. That is for sure. Shannon, thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Let's go to NBC News Now. Correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines for us from NBCNews.com. Hi, Simone.
Hey, Allison. We start with some news from the World Health Organization. They are warning against counterfeit COVID vaccines being sold on the dark web. The WHO is urging people to buy vaccines only from government-run programs, and the organization said they're also monitoring criminal groups tampering with empty vaccine vials. But they emphasize that any damage that comes from these phony doses does not reflect the safety of real vaccines. Well, the IRS announcing today that Americans can get tax breaks this year for masks, hand sanitizer, and other PPE that helped fight the spread of COVID. Taxpayers can deduct money spent on these items as medical expenses if they made up more than 7.5% of their income. So, for example, if you made $50,000 in 2020, you can deduct PPE costs of more than $3,750 from your tax bill. Now, expenses reimbursed by insurance aren't eligible, though. Well, Republican Senator Mitt Romney receiving this year's John F. Kennedy Profile in Courage Award for his historic vote to convict former President Donald Trump during his first impeachment trial last year. Romney, who faced backlash for his vote from colleagues and the public, is the first senator in U.S. history to vote to convict a president in his own party. Now, he told NBC News he does not regret his decision. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu failing to secure a majority in Israel's latest election. In order to form a government, Netanyahu needed at least 61 seats in parliament. This is the fourth Israeli election in 2 years. So with Israel in a political deadlock, the country could actually be facing a fifth election later this year. Allison, send it back to you.
All right, Simone, thank you. Now to an NBC News exclusive. The Department of Homeland Security considering major policy changes to fight the growing threat of domestic violent extremism. Two senior Biden administration officials saying DHS wants to improve its ability to collect and analyze data about domestic terrorism, including the kinds of social media posts that threatened an attack before the Capitol riot on January 6th, but weren't deemed actionable by law enforcement. NBC News correspondent Ken Delaney co-wrote that story along with Julia Ainsley. Ken is here with me now. So, Ken, how is the department planning to do all that?
Well, Allison, they haven't decided anything officially yet, but they are moving towards much more aggressive collection and analysis of public social media, the kind of thing that law enforcement is legally allowed to look at, but often has been reluctant to look at over First Amendment and free speech concerns. And so you had journalists gathering a lot of evidence before January 6th that people were threatening violence against the Capitol, but DHS and the FBI didn't publish any intelligence bulletins about it and didn't make sure that there were enough defenses to protect the Capitol. And folks want to make sure that that never happens again. And so they want to do a better job of tracking domestic extremists online. They also want to make better use of all the travel data that DHS agencies like the TSA and ICE and Customs and Border Protection gather. And they're even considering potentially putting domestic extremists on watch lists and no-fly lists, Allison. So big changes in the works.
Would that be like adding them to the terror watch list? Is that what you're saying there, Ken?
Yeah, that is one of the things under consideration because it's much more difficult. You know, first of all, they don't talk about the details of how they nominate people to watch lists, but our reporting is that it's much more difficult for Americans to be placed on these lists. Not unprecedented, but more difficult. And there are ways that they could make that easier. And they're really interested in people who, again, this is not about politics, not about ideology, they say. It's about violent rhetoric and threats of violence.
So you mentioned earlier privacy and civil liberty concerns. Those come along with these kinds of changes. So what is DHS doing to address that?
Yeah, 100%. The civil liberties community gets very nervous whenever the government says we want to do more surveillance. Yeah. They think that the government overreacted after 9/11. What DHS is saying is, look, everything we are doing, we're doing in concert with our Office of Civil Liberties, our Office of Privacy, with outside stakeholders, and with our lawyers. And they are saying we are ideologically neutral. What we're looking for is violent talk, not politics, not ideology, Allison.
All right, Ken Delaney, thanks very much.
You bet.
President Biden says it is time to change the filibuster, telling reporters yesterday the rules are a relic of the Jim Crow era. So is the filibuster's history rooted in racism? NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson takes a look.
Historians do not agree. It has no racial history at all. None.
The place where we really started to come to understand the filibuster as we do today is really intimately connected with its use as an obstructive tool of civil rights legislation.
The filibuster was created in 1806 when senators eliminated a rule unintentionally opening the door for unlimited debate.
There was not an immediate explosion of filibustering. That didn't happen until closer to the middle of the 19th century.
And after the Civil War, segregationists harnessed the power of the legislative tool.
There have been a lot of filibusters against civil rights, which had a huge effect upon the progress of civil rights in this country.
On August 28, 1957, a senator from South Carolina took to the Senate floor with one goal: preventing the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Senator Strom Thurmond spoke for 24 hours and 18 minutes in what would become the longest speaking filibuster in Senate history. In 1964, Southern senators launched a record-breaking filibuster against the Civil Rights Act that lasted for 60 days. Neither of those attempts worked. But before that, the tool was used successfully to block anti-lynching legislation and deny Black people the right to vote.
The 1960 Civil Rights Bill, round-the-clock sessions, make them talk. And the Southerners, they were well organized. Two of us will speak for 8 hours, and then two more for the next 8 hours, and two more for the next 8 hours. There's a reason people stopped just waiting it out, and it's because it was a losing game.
From kind of the mid-70s to today, we've seen it become increasingly routinized. Now, almost everything that comes to the floor in the Senate is subject to this 60-vote threshold.
Filibustering is an attempt to block or delay Senate action on a bill. It can be done by talking at length, presenting multiple procedural motions, among other things. Those in favor of the filibuster say that it encourages compromise on legislation and limits the power of the majority. Others say it gives a small minority too much power and encourages obstruction.
In the modern Senate, nobody ever has to speak for 24 hours. So it's really that there is an implied threat, and then the majority is trying to come up with 60 votes to end an unlimited debate that never actually begins.
The filibuster has been used more in the past decade than ever before, ramping up under Senate opposition to President Obama. Democrats also used it while Trump was president to block things like border wall funding and anti-abortion bills. But now, many Democrats worry the filibuster will be used to block legislation rooted in the same fights of the 50s and 60s.
If all this takes eliminating the filibuster, another Jim Crow relic, in order to secure the God-given rights of every American, then that's what we should do.
We must find a way to pass voting rights whether we get rid of the filibuster or not.
These talking points are an effort to use the terrible history of racism to justify a partisan power grab in the present.
Democrats, working to pass a slew of legislation, from voting rights to gun reform, say the filibuster must go. But Republicans say there will be hell to pay if it's eliminated.
Nobody serving in this chamber can even begin to imagine what a completely scorched earth Senate would look like.
To eliminate the filibuster outright, every single Democratic senator would have to vote in favor of the move. But not everyone is on board.
If you want to make it a little bit more painful, make him stand there and talk, I'm willing to look at any way we can, but I am not willing to take away the involvement of the minority.
Recently, President Biden has signaled an openness to this kind of reform.
It used to be you had to stand there and talk and talk and talk and talk until you collapsed. And guess what? People got tired of talking and tired of collapsing. Filibusters broke down and we were able to break the filibuster, get a quorum and vote. So I strongly support moving in that direction.
And if that doesn't work, Biden now says he's prepared to go further.
Well, we're going to get a lot done. And if we have to, if there's complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about.
The 2024 presidential race already starting. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in Iowa today, sparking speculation about a presidential run. NBC News political reporter Vaughn Hilliard is in Des Moines with more on Pompeo's visit.
Good afternoon, Allison. We are, if I may, about 35 months away from the Iowa caucus of 2024. And I say about because the Iowa caucus, there's not even an official date for it yet. But that hasn't stopped potential Republican presidential candidates from making their way here to Iowa just 65 days after Joe Biden was sworn in to the White House. But, I was talking with one Iowa strategist in the state who was telling me when I asked him, this is pretty early to kick open the door for presidential politics, even for Iowa. And he goes, there is no door to kick open anymore. And that is why you saw Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, roll into Iowa here today for multiple events. He spoke at a breakfast just outside of Des Moines with a group of Republican activists for a packed-in breakfast. But he was also holding a fundraiser for congressional candidate and Congresswoman Ashley Hinson. For Mike Pompeo, this is him, tiptoeing here into the 2024 conversation at a time in which President Trump has suggested that he may very well likely run himself. Of course, Pompeo, a very strong, close ally to the president during that administration and his service in it. I want to hear, though, from some of the folks who we talked to, in which Pompeo spoke to about what 2024 and these next 3 years could look like. Take a listen.
What do you think about 2024?
Oh, he's not running for president, I don't think. I would stay out of that altogether if I was him, but...
Why?
Oh, it's going to be a disaster. Completely disaster. I don't think he's running for president, though.
I think it's a matter of who Trump gets behind, frankly, if he doesn't run himself. So it's, obviously he's got a good relationship with Trump, and, I think it's just one of the early candidates that's trying to see what he wants to do.
Are you interested in him as a 2024 candidate?
Why not? He sounds good to me.
I would be good with that.
If President Trump were to run again, would you back him?
Sure, why not?
I would, yes.
Yep.
Is 2024 on your mind at all?
Oh, it is. Let's get through today first, shall we?
If President Trump were to get back in the race, would you back him in 2024?
We'll see what happens.
So you're open-minded?
I'm very open-minded.
There's the very real shot, if President Trump were not to enter this race, that there would be a big Republican field yet again. And that's why these folks here, yes, 3 years away from the Iowa caucus, are coming out to listen to folks like Mike Pompeo. We should note next week, Senator Rick Scott of Florida will be in town. And then Senator Tim Scott later on in April, the senator from South Carolina, he'll be rolling into Iowa. So you could say, Allison, you and I will likely be having some conversations here from the Midwest quite a bit in these months to come.
As many as 6 mystery drones swarming Navy destroyers off the coast of California. It happened over several days back in 2019, some of them flying for over 90 minutes, well beyond the capacity of commercially available drones. It's all according to a new investigation published by The Drive. NBC News correspondent and host of The Overview on Peacock, Gotti Schwartz, joining me now. Gotti, this reportedly sparked a high-level investigation within the military. Now, the Navy hasn't responded to a request for comment. So what else do you know about these mysterious drones?
Well, Allison, just a little bit ago, the Navy did confirm that their ships were in the area and that they had looked into this, and they provided us with some of those documents as well that showed that they followed up with some of the smaller boats in the area to see if they may have been flying drones, some commercial ones, some private ones, but they appear to have been too far away. And they asked a Carnival cruise ship nearby. They reported seeing the unidentified aerial vehicles as well. Now, here's where things get a little bit fuzzy. It appears from those ships' logs that for several nights off the coast of California, swarms of drones were basically harassing up to 3 Navy warships, the USS Kidd, the USS Rafael Peralta, and the USS John Finn. And special recon teams went out to the decks to document the lights and the abilities of these UAVs. But so far, no video has been released and no substantial documentation or evidence beyond some very vague descriptions. But one of those log entries details a fast forward, back, left, right maneuver over the ships. It's very similar to another well-publicized UFO encounter between fighter pilots in the same area and a flying object that they said looked like a Tic Tac that happened back in 2004. We spoke to David Fravor, the commander of the strike fighter squadron that flew directly at that mysterious object back then for our show on Peacock called The Overview. Take a listen to his description.
As soon as we look down, we see the whitewater, and then we see this little white tic tac. It's pointing north-south, and it's just going forward, back, left, right.
It's just bouncing around?
Yeah, like a ping pong ball.
What did it look like it was made out of?
Like a perfectly smooth white tic tac. Or for people that need a bigger visualization, a giant propane tank. And then it starts coming up at us. We call it two-circle fight, but it's coming up, I'm coming down. So it literally is aware we're there. There's no doubt because it mirrored me. So here it is. I cut across, and I get to about half mile of it, so I'm about halfway across the circle. As it gets in front of me, it just goes poof, and it's gone. And it's gone like that fast.
What do you mean, poof, it's gone?
I mean exactly that. Like, it's 1 minute it's there, and the next second, it's like magic trick.
Now, after that particular incident, another Super Hornet that took off just after Fravor landed was able to capture video of that object, and that video was released along with 2 other videos of UFOs in 2015-2016 by the Pentagon last year, still with no explanation. But again, so far in these sightings of these drones, no video has been released. These incidents involving the USS Kidd, at least not yet. But we'll see if some disclosures are coming soon. Allison?
Yeah, so Gotti, the December COVID relief bill includes a clause that calls on the Defense Department to release more details about UAPs or unidentified aerial phenomena. So does this mean we could learn more not only about these drones, but a lot of other incidents like this soon?
Possibly. But again, like you just said, it's not just this incident. The former director of the Pentagon's program to identify advanced aerial threats tells us point blank there are dozens and dozens of similar cases of unexplained intrusions into U.S. airspace over nuclear facilities, over other aircraft, by flying objects that sometimes appear to the pilots to break the laws of physics as we understand them. So some as close as 50 feet away to the cockpits. Now we will wait and see if the United States government will declassify more evidence in the next coming months. We're expecting a possible decision on that, or at least the outward appearance of a decision by mid-June. But again, we'll wait and see. Allison?
All right, Gotti, and before you go, we just have a personal question for you. Our producers want to know, how did you become like the official drone, UFO, out of space guy on NBC? I mean, you do this on Peacock on your show, The Overview. How does one become that guy?
I think, look, I grew up in New Mexico, right? And obviously, people think New Mexico, people think Roswell. It's not necessarily Roswell. Like, I still have no idea what happened in Roswell. I think there's something about growing up in a desert where you just look up at the sky, you see the stars, and you constantly wonder whether we're alone. But at the same time, there's this skepticism. So when you hear a lot of these outlandish stories, they seem too incredible to be true. So it's almost like an open-minded skeptic, if that's possible, but definitely growing up in the New Mexico desert and looking up, I guess helps.
Oh, well, I absolutely love it, Gotti. We love these stories. We're obsessed with wondering about what else is going on out there. Thank you so much for helping us piece together some of the answers in this great world mystery.
Thanks so much, Allison. Talk to you soon.
A trio of Latina scientists leading a COVID study in our nation's capital. NBC News correspondent Isa Gutierrez has more.
What used to be the medical field, the science field, laboratory field being run by white male, now it has turned into this beautiful rainbow of colors.
In the nation's capital, it's these 3 Latinas in lab coats who are leading the study of COVID-19. They're analyzing virus samples every day to track the spread and to detect new COVID mutations in the DC area.
Do you have moments throughout your day where you're like, wow, I'm like living history right now?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Every day. Yeah, every day I reflect and I'm like, wow, this is probably going to be in a history book. And I'm probably no book, right? A history module on a computer. Yeah, it's on a USB drive.
Connie, Liz, and Monica became the 3 musketeers
at
the start of the pandemic.
Oh, it was scary at first. I was very nervous.
After years of working behind the scenes in a quiet lab, suddenly the city was watching them.
It's just unbelievable how much the media, the pressure we had, we were under a microscope at that point. We were the ones that were detecting this virus and, and after detecting it, saying it to the public, who was how many positives we had. I'm normally pretty calm when I do testing, but at that moment when I was testing COVID, I have to admit, it was nerve-wracking.
Growing up, the lab wasn't a place they thought they could be.
I didn't expect a lot of women in the science field too much, especially because I probably just didn't think that that was an option.
In the U.S., both women and Latinx or Hispanic people are underrepresented in science and engineering jobs. And in 2016, only about 2% of all STEM degrees went to Hispanic and Latinx women.
My heritage is just the woman will stay home and take care of the kids and do most of the cleaning. My mom actually put aside her career just to raise us kids. She dedicated all those years to us, for us to have a better life.
Growing up in Uruguay, low-income family, my mom wanted to be a nurse. That was her dream. But unfortunately, life didn't give her that chance. She married at 18, got her first child at 19. She always loved to take care of sick people, right? She had that passion, and she's very proud of me now.
My mom does have a bachelor's in biology, so she did grow up loving the sciences and having a passion for the sciences, but she never got to fulfill a career in the sciences. And I wanted to do things a little differently. I didn't want to be a housewife. So I wanted to get out and get a career and, work full time.
Today, these three have each other to look up to. They credit their bond for getting them through some of the toughest days of the pandemic.
When I see Monica and Liz, I see hardworking women. I see the dedication they have and the positive attitude that they come in every day. I know the work is hard, but I see that in y'all all the time, and that's what keeps them going all the time.
We don't have to stay late. We stay late just to finish the job, and we're all the same. We have that same kind of work ethic, and I think that's very inspiring.
We are Latinas. That's what we do. We grew up the hard way, and we keep applying that every day.
And we give each other a name. Like I always tell, I kid around with Liz, and we already named her this. I say, la que no se va, ¿verdad?
Nunca me voy, me quedo.
There's always...
She's always here. You think lab, you think such a sterile environment, but it's like the three of you bring this warmth and this feeling of home here, no?
Yeah, the lab is definitely our home away from home.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Young women who are envisioning themselves or who don't envision themselves in spaces like these, what do you want them to know?
Keep knocking on doors, and some of them will open.
How about when people tell you or make you feel this isn't a space for you?
Actually more motivating. If they do, in a way, say something like that, it makes me even work harder. It's like, I'm going to prove them wrong.
I do get that sometimes. When people ask me what I do and I tell them I'm a scientist, and they're like, really?
What is
that? Yeah, sure I am. I can tell you about some DNA. You want to learn?
While the end of the pandemic finally seems to be in sight, these Latina scientists aren't done writing their chapter in history. And Las Tres Mosqueteras aren't going anywhere, except maybe on a well-deserved break.
I think we're going to continue to keep this forever.
Maybe one day vacation.
Vacation together,
in separate areas.
Yeah, this is going to last a lifetime.
Yeah, this is it.
About 2.5 million Americans get vaccinated on an average day, but new COVID cases are up in the last week. So are hospitalizations and deaths, hovering around 1,000 a day. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky today reminding Americans to take this virus seriously.
I remain deeply concerned about this trajectory. We have seen cases and hospital admissions move from historic declines to stagnations to increases. And we know from prior surges that if we don't control things now, there is a real potential for the epidemic curve to soar again.
Dr. Chris Purnell, public health physician and American College of Preventive Medicine fellow, joins me now. Dr. Purnell, great to see you. How concerned are you that we could be heading towards another coronavirus surge here?
I'm concerned. I'm remaining vigilant. I'm vigilant because I definitely sense fatigue in the nation. We've sensed fatigue for quite some time. But now we actually see restrictions being relaxed. We see more Americans traveling than have traveled any time during or before the pandemic just struck. So we have to focus, we have to hunker down, if you will, because it's going to be very important for us to outpace the variants. We've spoken a lot about the variants, whether it is the UK variant or the South African variant or the Brazilian variant, or some of the variants that are in states that we know, in New York, in California. We need to outpace that by getting people vaccinated. So if we let up too quickly, we could compromise the safety of the entire public.
The White House announcing that Johnson & Johnson will deliver 11 million COVID shots next week. Will that help keep this vaccine on track? I know there have been some J&J production concerns. Are you worried about that?
Look, I'm excited to hear that we're going to see more doses coming out of Johnson & Johnson. What's attractive Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that it's one dose. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine can be more mobile, especially in hard-hit communities or communities where there are barriers, logistical barriers in particular to getting vaccinated. And the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has a longer refrigerator shelf life. So we need to be able to have that tool in our toolkit. So it's welcome news to hear what was announced today. But again, vaccines don't save lives, vaccinations do. Now we got to get those doses in arms. So cities, towns across America, whether it's at the state level or the local level, and even the federal level, we need to be thinking through the logistics to actually getting those doses to the people who so desperately need them.
Dr. Purnell, there have been some instances of so-called breakthrough cases, people who are already fully vaccinated who then get COVID. Here's Dr. Fauci.
In some respects, that's not surprising. One of the important things that will be done and must be done is to sequence the genome of the virus that's the breakthrough virus, because it would be very important to see if they broke through with the wild type virus, which would indicate a real diminution of immunity, or whether it broke through with one of the variants, which would be much more explainable.
Is this something we should be concerned about? And how long could it take to figure out exactly what we're dealing with here?
This is something that we have to better understand in the American public. And what I mean by that, because you are vaccinated, it doesn't mean necessarily that you could not get coronavirus. It significantly reduces the likelihood that you would get coronavirus. What we have not heard, though, is that anyone that is vaccinated has had severe disease, and it has not contributed to anyone's death. Right. So that's what vaccines are designed to do. Vaccines are designed to save lives by preventing death. And all of these vaccines that have been approved to date have been very effective at that, even in the face of the variants. Dr. Fauci raises a very important point. OK, not only do we want to see what types of symptoms or what types of presentations do people who are fully vaccinated who go on to be infected have, but more importantly, we want to know through sequencing, was this a particular variant that evaded the immunity that was conferred by the vaccination? I'm still pretty confident that the vaccines that we have are able to beat back those variants, but we just have to stay on top of it. The science will continue to evolve. And as that science evolves, we need to communicate that in plain spoken terms and use this as a reason why we still need to double down on those basic public health measures like wearing your mask, practicing physical distancing, and frequent hand hygiene.
Dr. Purnell, thank you so much. Have a safe and healthy weekend.
Thank you.
New Zealand, now the second country in the world to give paid leave post-miscarriage. Mothers and their partners will get 3 days of bereavement leave if a pregnancy ends in a miscarriage or stillbirth. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter looks at this groundbreaking policy.
Allison, this is a huge story, one that women around the world, all of my friends woke up this morning tweeting about, sharing on social media. So this was passed, the bill was passed unanimously in the parliament in New Zealand. It will become law in the coming weeks. But what it says is that after a miscarriage, at any point in the pregnancy, both parents, that's mother and partner, which is so important, get paid leave. Now, New Zealand already had on the books paid leave after a stillbirth after 20 weeks. Here in the UK, Allison, where I am, there's paid leave, short paid leave after a stillbirth at 24 weeks. But the U.S. has nothing like it on the books. Now, take a look at this graphic. According to the Mayo Clinic, about 20% of pregnancies end in miscarriages. About the same stat in New Zealand, where the health ministry there says about 1 in 4 women will experience miscarriages. What's different, though, Allison, between the U.S. and New Zealand? Take a look at this. The percentage of women in parliament. New Zealand has one of the highest percentages of women in government in the world, and that makes a difference. I want to share a tweet from the parliamentarian, from the lawmaker that championed this, Ginny Anderson. She tweets, "This is a bill about workers' rights and fairness. I hope it gives people time to grieve and promotes greater openness about miscarriage. We should not be fearful of our bodies." Alison, this, of course, comes amid a global discussion about women in the workplace, about fairness, about parental leave, shared parental leave, and about miscarriage and about kind of breaking through that stigma around miscarriages. Big celebrities. Meghan Markle wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. Chrissy Teigen, of course, shared those heartbreaking photos, shared her story in the open. Now, advocates the world over are pointing to New Zealand, pointing to this bill, hoping that it starts a trend.
Sweeping the clouds away, but not sweeping important issues under the rug. Sesame Street trying to talk to its young viewers about race and racism in ways they can understand. The show introducing 2 new characters, Muppets Wes and Elijah, a black father and son. NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce has their story.
Many people call this race, but even though we look different, we're all part of the human race.
Meet Wes and Elijah. The father and son duo are Sesame Street's newest cast members.
Now we knew we had to make deeper and more concrete discussions around race and racism. So having these 2 characters allows us to do that.
I love my skin. This isn't Sesame Street's first time dealing with race. Since its very first season, the show has had a diverse group of voices in front of and behind the camera.
And it's often what we heard the first time that many children saw themselves being reflected on television.
But Wes and Elijah are a little different. They'll be talking about race and racism explicitly, in terms kids can understand. It's part of Sesame Street's Coming Together initiative. The goal is to help
build color-proud children.
What does color-proud mean?
We know that children from very early on are not colorblind, meaning that from infancy, they start to know differences. And us grown-ups are helping them do that. And so by having open discussions around race, we're really building color-proud children.
Elmo wants to know why Wes's skin is brown.
Oh, I know why, Elmo. My mom and dad told me. It's because of melanin.
Parents have been asking Sesame Street for more resources to help facilitate these conversations. It can be tough to find the right words, but Wes and Elijah are up to the task.
I am somebody, and I will stand up. I will speak up. I'm beautiful, you know. I'm beautiful, you know.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.